Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Aleph. We are continuing to learn Hilchas Tzitzis, and in today's share we will be learning Emir Hashem part of Yud Ches Amid Aleph as well as Yud Ches Amid Beis. So we're a little bit behind the eight ball. Let's get right to it. We pick up on Yud Ches Amid Aleph Siman Yud in the midst of Sif Vav. Now we did the beginning of Sif Vav, and really Sif Vav covers two very different halachos. So we already spoke about the beginning of Sif Vav, which involves a folded talus. And we're going to pick up today with the second halacha of Sif Vav, which begins 4 lines down in the Shulchan Aruch, with the words Hittel tzitzis al tzitzis. Now, before we begin to explain what the Mechaber says over here, we have to give a little bit of background. We learned earlier in Sif Hey about the psul of taseh v'loy min ha'osui in the context of tzitzis. So let's remind ourselves. The pasuk in the Torah Kedosha tells us Gedilim taseh lecha lach al arba kanfos kesusecha. You should place tzitzis on the four corners of your beged. And what we learn out from there is that when we affix the tzitzis to the beged, we have to put them on the beged bekashrus. What do I mean? You have to put the tzitzis on a four-cornered beged that is chayiv in tzitzis. Gedilum tasalach where al arba kanfos kesusecha. You should place the tzitzits onto the four-cornered garment. And therefore, the Mechaber told us in Sif Hey, let's say you had a garment that only had three corners, and you went ahead and you put tzitzits on three corners, and then you cut the beged to form a fourth corner, and you then affixed tzitzits to the fourth corner. We said that that would be puzzle. Why? Because the first three sets of tzitzit strings that you put onto that beged were not done bekashrus. You didn't affix those tzitzits to a garment that was chayiv in tzitzits. You put those three sets of tzitzit strings onto a three-cornered garment, not onto a four-cornered garment. And what we need is gedilim tasalach al arba kanfos ksuscha. You have to affix the tzitzits to a garment that already has four corners. So here we have the source for the psul of taseh. You should make tzitzits on a garment that's already chayiv in tzitzits, v'loy min ha'osui. But we cannot use tzitzits that are already there before there was a need for them, like tzitzits that were already put onto a three-cornered garment before it was a four-cornered garment. So that's the psul of taseh v'loy min ha'osui. Here now in Sif Vav, we're going to discuss a very interesting case. What happens if we have a perfectly kosher talus cotton? We have a four-cornered talus cotton. It has four sets of tzitzits on it. It's all ready to be used. Maybe you've been wearing it already for a month. It's a perfect talus cotton. But you decide that you want to replace the strings. Maybe you had thin strings and now you want to have thick strings. So you have a talus cotton and you want to replace the tzitzits. You say to yourself, you know what? I want to replace the tzitzits, but I don't want to take the old tzitzits off and then have a four-cornered garment without any tzitzits and then put the new tzitzits on. Instead, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to put four new sets of tzitzits onto the garment while the old tzitzits are still there. And after I put the new tzitzits on, then I'll remove the old tzitzits. Can you do that? Now, there seems to be a very good reason to think that that would be possible because of taseh v'loy min ha'osui. Why? I'll tell you why. The original set of tzitzit strings that you have on the tzitzits, those are fine. You put them onto that talus cotton bekashrus. You had a four-cornered talus cotton, and you put tzitzits on. That's fine. But the new set of tzitzit strings, when you put those tzitzit strings on this garment, was there a chiyuv? Did you have a chiyuv to put those tzitzit strings on? Were they necessary? No, not at all. The garment already had tzitzits on it. So there was absolutely no need to add another set of tzitzit strings to the garment. Not only that, but the truth is putting those tzitzit strings on actually creates a problem. Because by putting those tzitzis strings on now if you put on that beged, you're over on Baal Tosef. So if you add additional sets of tzitzis strings to a talis cotton that already has the 4 sets of tzitzis strings that it needs on them, and now you go cut off the original ones, and now you want to patter the beged with the new ones, there's a very strong argument that should be possible because of tasev aloi mina asui. Because these new tzitzis strings that you are now relying on, they were not put onto this garment bekashrus. They were not put onto the garment when they were needed. It's the same as the 3-cornered beged, where you put 3 sets of tzitzis on, and then you made a 4th corner and you added a 4th one. Those 3 corners did not get tzitzis when they were needed. So too over here, the new tzitzis strings that you put on, when you put them on, they weren't necessary. Now you cut off the old ones. Very nice. By cutting off the old ones, you now created a situation where you need the new ones. But you didn't need the new ones when you put them on. So l'chayra, there's a very strong argument to make that this should be possible because of tasev aloi mina asui. Now the truth is that the Gemara in Menachos on Daf Mem Amud Beis discusses this very shaila. Very, very interesting. The Gemara in Menachos on Daf Mem Amud Beis establishes the psul of tasev aloi mina asui. After the Gemara establishes the psul, the Gemara asks a kasha. The Gemara says, how could you tell me that there's a psul of tasev aloi mina asui by tzitzits? V'ha'amar Reb Zera, we have a member from Reb Zera. Reb Zera said, hitil limuteles, if you put on tzitzits, hitil, if you attach tzitzits, limuteles, to a garment that already has tzitzits on it, kishera, it's kosher. And the Gemara, the Rishonim, understand that what Reb Zera is saying is exactly the case that I just described. You put tzitzits onto a garment that already had tzitzits on it. So when you put these new tzitzits on, there was absolutely no need for them. And then what did you do? Then you cut off the old ones. So l'chayra, when you put on the new ones, you put them on when there was no need. By cutting off the old ones, now you created the need for the new ones. So we said, l'chayra, that sounds like tasev aloi mina asui. But the Gemara in Menachos asks, Reb Zera says that this is kosher. Reb Zera says you're allowed to do this. So the Gemara asks, l'chayra, you see from Reb Zera that there is no psul of tasev aloi mina asui. That's the Gemara's kasha. Comes along Rava, and Rava gives a fascinating answer. And by the way, the pshat that I'm going to give you in the Gemara is the way the Rambam learns pshat in the Gemara, at least according to the Kesef Mishnah. Now let's remember that the Kesef Mishnah is who? Is Rabbi Yosef Kairo. So Kesef Mishnah, Beis Yosef, Mechaber of the Shulchan Aruch. Same person. Okay, so the Kesef Mishnah says, how did the Rambam learn pshat in the Gemara? The Rambam learned pshat in the Gemara like this. Rava comes along, and Rava answers this kasha. You know what? I have a Menachos Gemara here. I could read it to you. Yeah. Menachos, Mem Amud Beis. Rava says, Amar Rava. Rava answers Reb Zera's kasha, and he says, Hashta bebal toisiv koi. You're telling me this person, when he added the new tzitzits to the garment, he accomplished something. You know what he accomplished? He accomplished that should he now put this pair of tzitzits on, he would be over on Baal Tosef. Because the Torah Kedosha says, Gedilim tasalach al arba kanfeis kesosacha, and this person now has more than 4 tzitzits on the garment. So if he puts on this garment now, he's over Baal Tosef. So Rava says, Hashta bebal toisiv koi. Now that he put these new additional tzitzits on, by putting these tzitzits on, he would be over on Baal Tosef. Maisa loy heavy? You're going to tell me that he's not doing a maisa by putting those tzitzits on? What's Rav saying? Rav is saying something very fascinating. Rav is saying, you want to apply the psul of tasev aloi mina asui to this case. Now, if you apply the psul of Tasa v'lo mina asui, what are you saying? What you're saying is the new tzitzis that this person put on, that is asui. That's min ha'asui. Those tzitzis, when you put them on the garment, there was no need for them. Since there was no need for them, the act of attaching those new tzitzits to the garment was not a choshev a maisa. It wasn't really, you didn't do anything. You didn't accomplish anything. You took sets of tzitzit strings and you tied them onto a garment that does not need tzitzit strings because it already has tzitzit strings. So you didn't do a maisa. It's only when you cut off the old strings that now these new strings become choshev. But then you didn't have a maisa. It's tasa v'lo mina asui. You weren't mekayim gedilim taselach al arba kanfais kesusacha. Because when you put these tzitzits that you are not now relying on, when you put those tzitzits on, there was no choshev a maisa involved because they weren't necessary when you put them on. Says Rava, you can't apply the psul of tasa v'lo mina asui here. You know why? Because I'll prove to you that the act of putting on the new tzitzits was a choshev a maisa. You know why it was a choshev a maisa? Because you accomplished something by putting it on. In halacha, you accomplished something. By putting those new tzitzits onto the garment, you created a garment that if somebody puts it on, it'll be over on Bal Taisif. So you can't tell me it wasn't a choshev a maisa. Halachically, it's a very significant maisa. Even though it's not really a significant maisa in the world of tzitzits, in the context of Hilchas tzitzits, it doesn't seem to be a choshev a maisa, because again, this garment doesn't need these new tzitzits. You have the old tzitzits. So in the world of Hilchas tzitzits, it does not seem to be a significant maisa, but in the world of Torah, it is a significant maisa, because you have now created a beged that if somebody puts it on, he'll be over on Bal Tosef. So says Rava, therefore you cannot apply the psul of Tasa v'lo mina asui. So again, let's just recap. The Gemara said there's a psul of Tasa v'lo mina asui. Frek the Gemara, how could you tell me there's a psul of Tasa v'lo mina asui? Reb Zera says, you have a garment that has four corners, it has tzitzits on it, you added new tzitzits onto this garment, you don't need them, so there's no asiya here. There's no maisa of tzitzits putting these tzitzits onto the beged. Then you cut off the original tzitzits. Okay, when you cut off the original tzitzits, now the new tzitzits that you added are now needed and they're now choshev. If there's a psul of tasa v'lo mina asui, that should be pasul. But Reb Zera says it's kosher. Answers Rava, the reason why you can't apply tasa v'lo mina asui there is because even though it's true that when you put on the new tzitzits, they weren't needed, mitam hilchas tzitzits, they weren't necessary, but the act of putting the new tzitzits on the beged was a choshev a maisa because it created a scenario whereby you could be over on Bal Tosef. So since halachically it's a significant maisa, now when you cut off the old tzitzits, you're not going to say it's tasa v'lo mina asui. That's not asui. That's not tzitzit strings that already were there without an asiya. No, putting on those tzitzit strings was a very choshev a maisa because it created a scenario for Bal Tosef. That's how Rava answers the kasha. Comes along Rav Papa, and Rav Papa asks a kasha on Rava. Rav Papa asks on Rava, when Reb Zera said his halacha, did Reb Zera say anything about Bal Tosef? No. Did Reb Zera say anything about what the kavana of the person who was putting the new tzitzits onto the beged was? No. All Reb Zera said was, hitil limuteles, if you added new tzitzit strings onto a beged that already had tzitzit strings, and then you removed the original ones, it's kosher. That's all Reb Zera said. So Rav Papa asks on Rava, who told you that there's Bal Tosef over here? Now, why would there not be Bal Tosef? Says Rav Papa, how do we know what the kavana of the person who was putting the new tzitzit strings on, how do we know what his kavana was? If his kavana was to add additional tzitzits, The Torah says you need 4 and I'm putting on 5 or 6 or 7 or 8. If that was his kavanah, so then you're right. Then when he puts it on, he's over Baal Tosef. But maybe that wasn't his kavanah at all. Maybe his kavanah was the way I said it in the beginning of the shir. He wants to replace his tzitzis strings. He never had in mind that he's going to wear this beged with 8 sets of tzitzis strings. He knows you can't wear a talis cut with 8 sets of tzitzis strings. His kavanah all along was to remove the old ones. And when he was putting the new ones on, his kavanah was replacement. What does replacement mean? I'm being mevatel the old ones, I'm negating the old ones, and I'm going to put on new ones, and I'm going to use the new ones. So says Rav Papa, Rava, you're saying that Tasav Aloymana Asui doesn't apply to Reb Zera's case, because since he's creating a beged where he can be over on Baal Tosef, there's no Tasav Aloymana Asui. Says Rav Papa, we don't know that he's creating a beged where you could be over on Baal Tosef. If his kavanah is to be mevatel the old strings and to replace them with the new strings, then there is no Baal Tosef. And Reb Zera says flat out, Reb Zera says a general rule that in this case, you could be yoytze tzitzis, hit the limud kshera, even if his kavanah was to be mevatel the old ones. So Rav Papa says, that's not pshat Reb Zera. He doesn't agree to Rav's pshat in Reb Zera. Says Rav Papa, you know what pshat Reb Zera is? I'll tell you what pshat Reb Zera is. Rav Papa says like this. When Reb Zera says, hit the limud kshera, he's talking about a case where the person who's adding the tzitzits wants to be mevatel the old ones. Since he wants to be mevatel the old ones, there is no tasav aloymana asui. You know why? Because the whole reason you thought that there should be tasav aloymana asui here is because you looked at it and you said, this beged is not chayiv in additional tzitzits. This beged has 4 corners with tzitzits. It doesn't need anything new. When you tie on a new set of tzitzits onto a corner, you're not doing anything. You're not doing anything until you cut off the old ones. Says Rav Papa, no, that's not true. By this person who wants to replace his old tzitzits, when he's tying on the new tzitzits, he's being mevatel the old ones, and his kavanah is to remove the old ones. And then he went ahead and he did remove the old ones. Says Rav Papa, we don't look at his act of tying the new tzitzits onto the garment as not a choshev amaisa. We don't look at it that he's not doing anything. Of course he's doing something. He's putting new tzitzits, l'shem mitzvahs tzitzis. He's putting new tzitzits onto a garment with kavanah to be mevatel the old ones. The attaching of the new tzitzits and the removal of the old tzitzits are all part of the maisa of properly affixing this beged with tzitzits. And therefore you cannot apply the halacha of tasav aloymana asui. But, Rav Papa says, if the kavanah of the person would be to add on additional tzitzits and to keep the additional tzitzits, if his kavanah was, I don't want a beged with 4 corners of tzitzits, I want a beged with 8 corners of tzitzits, then, says Rav Papa, the talis cotton is puzzle, even if you subsequently remove the extra tzitzits. Why? Because now, when you put on the new tzitzits, you're creating a garment of Baal Tosef, so the new tzitzits certainly are not kosher. Adarabah, they're almost a chayfet shalavera. You're using them to create a situation of Baal Tosef. But you're also puzzling the old ones, because once you put on an extra corner of tzitzis, you're not allowed to wear this talis cotton anymore. So you mevatel the old ones. What do I mean you mevatel the old ones? You puzzled them. So now what are you going to do? You're going to remove the new ones? If you remove the new ones, now you have tasav aloymana asui. Why? You had a garment with 4 tzitzis that was kosher. You put on a 5th corner of tzitzis. You puzzled it. Now everything that's here is puzzle. Now if you remove the 5th one, you are once again making the original 4 kosher. That's tasav aloymana asui. So if you want to remove the new ones, it's possible because of Tasav V'Lo and Asui. You want to remove the old ones? Okay, it's still possible. Because when you put on the new ones, they weren't tzitzits, they were Bal Taisif. So that's how Rav Papa learns Pshat in the Gemara. That's how Rav Papa learns Pshat in Reb Zera. So at the end of the day, when we go through this whole Gemara in Menachos, according to the Rambam we're going to see paskins like Rav Papa. Since the Rambam paskins like Rav Papa, says the Rambam in Hilchos Tzitzis Perek Aleph Halacha Tesvav, Hitil tzitzits al hatzitzits. If you added additional tzitzits to a garment that already has tzitzits, it depends. Im niskaven levatel sarishaynais. If your kavana was to negate and replace the original tzitzits, then matir harishayna, take off the original ones, oichaycha, or cut them off, ukshera, and it's kosher. You hear what the Rambam says? You had a talis cotton with 4 corners, with 4 sets of tzitzits. You put on another 4, so now you have 8. If when you put on the new 4, your kavana was to be mevatel the old ones and replace them, no problem. Cut off the old ones. You can't leave the old ones on. While the old one's on, not only is this talis cotton puzzle, but to put it on would be Bal Taisif. But cut off the old ones, and now it's kosher. I tasav loimen asui. No, when you put on the 4 new ones, you did it with intent to be mevatel and to remove the old ones. So that's all part of the asiyah of these tzitzits. So there's no tasav loimen asui. But, says the Rambam, v'im niskavid lahoisif, but if your kavana was to add on additional tzitzits and to use this talis cotton with additional tzitzits, then afal pisha chatach achas mishtayan, then even if you cut off one of the sets, harezu psula, then it's puzzle. Why? Sharei kishahoisif, when you added on an additional set of tzitzits, pasal as hakoil, you passel the whole talis cotton, and now if you untie or cut off what you added, nimtza hashar naseh ben asui, so it's tasav v'lo ben asui. That's the Rambam in Perek Aleph Halacha Tezvav. Now let's see the Mechaber, who so often kedarka b'kodesh, he paskins like the Rambam. 5 lines, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 lines down in the Mechaber Yud Ches Amud Aleph. Hitel tzitzits al tzitzits. If you added additional sets of tzitzits to a garment that already had tzitzits, says the Mechaber, it depends on your kavana. Im niskaven levatel harishayna. If when you tied on these new additional tzitzits, your kavana was to be mevatel and to replace the original tzitzits, so go ahead. Chaytech harishayna, cut off the original ones, ukshera, and the talis cotton is kosher. And as we explained, there's no problem of tasav loimen asui because this is all taseh. This is the maisa that you're doing to make the tzitzits. Yes, I have a garment that properly has 4 corners of tzitzits on it, but I want to replace 1 corner. So I'm tying on a new one, and even though as I'm tying on the new one, the garment doesn't really need it, because the garment already has 4 sets of tzitzits on it, it doesn't matter. Why doesn't it matter? Because I'm putting it onto a kosher garment. I'm putting it onto a garment that has 4 corners. So I'm putting it onto a 4-cornered garment, and I'm doing it with intent to remove the existing one. So the putting on of the new one and the removing of the old one is all part of the asiyah. And I'm not putting it onto a 3-cornered garment that's not chayiv in tzitzits, like in Sif Hey. I'm putting it onto a 4-cornered garment that is chayiv in tzitzits. So there's no psul of tasav v'lo ben asui. But, continues the Mechaber, the end of line 4, v'im niskaven lahoisif, but if your kavana was to add additional tzitzits to the garment, to add a 5th corner of tzitzits, afal pisha chatach achas mishtayan psula, then even if you cut off one of the 2 sets of tzitzits, it's going to be puzzle. Why? Because as soon as you put on a 5th set of tzitzits onto this garment, you puzzled it. And you can't tell me that it was an act of asiyah of making it kosher. No, your kavana was to put on a 5th corner, so you puzzled the tzitzits. Now you go in and you take it off, and you want to rely on the original 4? No, you pasaled them already. Yeah, but now I took off the additional one, so it's kosher again. No, that's tasa v'lo min asli. Okay, before we see the Ramah, let's see the Mishnah Berurah. He's cutting tezvav. No, I'm sorry. He's cutting chaf. Harishaina. What did the Mechaber say? The Mechaber said that in the case where it's going to be kosher, in the case where you put on new tzitzis with kavanah to be mevatel the old tzitzis, so put on the new tzitzis, and then take off harishaina, remove the original one. Says the Mishnah Berurah, efshe de dafka nokat. It could be that you have to remove the original ones. You can't remove the new ones. Is puzzle. If you would try to make it kosher by removing the new ones, it would be puzzle. Came in the kfar bitel harishayna. See, what he's saying is like this: when you put on the new tzitzis, your kavanah was to be mevatel the old tzitzis. You can't now go ahead and remove the new one and rely on the old ones because you already mevatel the old ones. Okay, for something that's so complicated, the Chavetz Chaim was very quiet here. On everything that we discussed in the first 26 minutes of the shir, the only Mishnah Berurah is Ois Kat and Chaf. That is the only Mishnah Berurah. Okay, now we go to the Ramah. Says the Ramah, V'yesh machshirim. There are those V'yesh machshirim b'chol inyan. There are those that say that this is kosher, b'chol inyan, meaning no matter what your intent was. And this is the sheet of the Rosh. The Rosh holds very different than the Rambam. And the Rosh holds, you want to put on new tzitzis and then you want to take off the old tzitzis, that's fine, and it doesn't matter what your kavanah was. That's what the Rambam means when he says, b'chol inyan, this is kosher no matter what. He means no matter what your kavanah was. Whether your kavanah was to be mevatel the old ones, whether your kavanah was to add on new ones, he says, it's fine. As long as you end up with a garment with 4 corners of tzitzis, you want to add on another 4 so that you have 8, and then you want to remove 4, go ahead, and it doesn't matter what your kavanah was. I don't think it matters which ones you take off. And the reason is, I think according to the Rosh, from looking into Beis Yosef, seems to me that the reason for the Rosh says he doesn't mix the world of Baal Tosef with the world of tzitzits at all. And he says it's not tasa v'lo min asli. Why? Because when you add an additional corner of tzitzis, it's true that you're rendering the talis cotton something that you're not allowed to wear because of Baal Tosef. But you're not pasaling it in the world of tzitzis. It's not a chesaron in hilchos tzitzis as much as it's a problem of Baal Tosef. And therefore he doesn't look at this as a problem of tasa v'lo min asli at all. And the Ramah says, v'chein ikar. But the Ramah concludes, but before you cut off the extra ones, pasal b'chol inyan, certainly the talis cotton is pasal, because if you put it on, you would be over on Baal Tosef. No matter what your intent was, the Rosh holds this is kosher. And it doesn't matter which ones you cut off, whether you cut off the original set or the new set, it doesn't matter. And this is indeed how the Achrayim paskin, like this Ramah. The Ramah said, but realize that before you cut off the extra ones, you're simply not allowed to wear it, and it's not kosher. And the word that the Ramah used was, he didn't say the extra ones, he said harishonos. So again, the way the Ramah is writing it, it sounds like even according to the Rosh, you add on new tzitzits, you have to cut off the original tzitzits to make it kosher. But the Mishnah Berurah says that's not so. Nakat harishonos, the only reason the Ramah uses the word harishonos is the kaya mashakasav Shulchan Aruch mitchila chaytech harishonos, because he's going back on the language of the Mechaber, and the Mechaber said chaytech harishonos. V'lazeh kasav v'kayin v'shachatech harishonos. Ava be'emes laharash to maskina kavasei, but in truth, according to the Rosh, kolshkein dimchatech hashniya is kosher. It would be equally kosher. As a matter of fact, it's even a kolshkein that it's kosher if you cut off the new ones. Kamay de isa bebeis Yosef. Okay. Now we move on to Siv Zayin. 2 lines from the bottom, Yud Ches Amud Aleph. Says the Mechaber, Malbushim shehem psuchim min hatstadin, garments that are open on the sides, lamata towards the bottom, V'yesh lahem arba kanfos litzad mata, so that at the bottom they have 4 corners. Ulamayla hem stumim, however, up towards the top they are closed. What is the Mechaber saying? Well, let's imagine a talis cotton. We don't even have to imagine. I have one right here. Here we have a typical talis cotton, right? Now, the talis cotton, you know what? I'm going to make this easier, even though I had pinned it up. I'm going to unpin it, and I'm actually going to put it on because I think that will be the easiest way to illustrate this. So here we have a talis cotton, right? 4-cornered garment. I put it on. It's a 4-cornered garment. I have, and there goes my camera completely out of focus. This is starting to become a real pain in the neck. Okay, this is completely a 4-cornered garment. I have 2 corners in the front, right? This is the part of the talis cotton that's up in the front. And I have 4 corners in the back, which probably went over my chair. Yeah, okay. And I have 4 corners. I have 2 corners in the back as well. 1 corner, 2 corners. Now, if I turn sideways, as you can see, the garment is completely opened at the sides, right? I have the front and the back, and it's completely opened. And that's why it's a 4-cornered garment. It's a 4-cornered garment because I have 1 section hanging in the front, 1 section hanging in the back, and each section ends in 2 corners. Now, what would be if I would close these corners up? Okay? We'll stitch them closed. So now, the sides would actually be closed up. Now, once you close it up, it's no longer a 4-cornered garment at some point, right? Imagine if you stitch it all the way closed from top to bottom at the sides, so that you stitch it all the way up the sides, and there's just an armhole, but then it's stitched closed all the way to the bottom. Well, then you don't have 4 corners anymore. Now, what the Mechaber is going to discuss over here is how much of the sides do you have to close in order for the garment no longer to be chayiv in tzitzis. So now let's read the words of the Mechaber in Siv Zayin again inside. Malbushim shem psuchin min hatstadim lemata. A garment that's opened at the sides towards the bottom, meaning that it was closed up at the top. Under the arm, they closed it and stitched it down, but they didn't stitch it down all the way, so that at some point towards the bottom, it's opened. And at some point towards the bottom, you do have 4 corners, because it is hanging open at the bottom. So it's psuchim and atstadim lamata, it's open at the sides towards the bottom. V'yesh lahem arba kanfos litzad mata, so that it does have 4 corners towards the bottom. But ulamayla, but up top under the arms, heim stumim, they sewed it closed. What's the halacha? Says the Mechaber, it depends. Im rubai sasum, if roiv of the side is closed, and we'll have to see what roiv means, but if the majority of the side is closed, potter, then the beged is potter in tzitzis. Ve'im rubai pasuach, but if most of the garment is open on the side, then chayiv, then the beged is chayiv in tzitzis. Ve'im chetziyoi sasu v'chetziyoi pasuach. What if it's exactly 50-50? It's 50% open, 50% closed. Then says the Mechaber, matilin oisai lechumra, then we place upon this beged a stringent halacha. What's the stringency? For one, v'chayiv b'tzitzis. You're not allowed to wear it without tzitzis. But on the other hand, we're going to also act stringently as if it's a beged that's not really chayiv in tzitzis, and therefore v'ein yotzin by b'Shabbos. You wouldn't be allowed to wear this pair of tzitzis outside on Shabbos. Why? Because if it's truly a 4-cornered beged, then it's chayiv in tzitzis. If it's chayiv in tzitzis, then when you go outside wearing your tzitzis, these strings are not considered a masa. It's not considered that you're carrying something because they're part of the beged. The beged requires them in order for you to be allowed to wear it. But if the beged is not truly chayiv in tzitzis, then what purpose do these fringes serve? They don't serve any purpose at all. In that case, they're a masa. They're a burden that you're carrying, and you're not allowed to wear it outside on Shabbos in Rosh Hashanah if there's no Erev. Okay, let's turn back to Yud Ches Amud Aleph, and let's see the Mishnah Berurah. Mishnah Berurah is Katan Chav Daled. Potter. So again, what did the Mechaber say? And now I'm going to take the talis cotton, I think, off, just for illustrative purposes. So, the Mechaber was talking about a case where you took the sides of the tzitzits and you stitched them closed. So you left an opening for an armhole, and then you stitched it closed. But you didn't stitch it closed down all the way. You stitched it closed partially, but at the bottom of the beged, you left the sides hanging open so that it's still a four-cornered beged. Says the Mishnah Berurah Dalit Potter, if you close up the majority of the side of the beged, then it's potter and tzitzits. Says the Mishnah Berurah, this is true. Let's say at the bottom of the talis cotton, right? You sewed down the sides, you left it partially open near the bottom, so you still have a front and a back near the bottom. Now, tzitzits have a minimum shear. You have to have a certain amount in front, a certain amount in back. We're going to see 3/4 of an amma in the front, 3/4 of an amma in the back. Let's say you had a very big talis cotton. So even after you sewed down the majority of the side, the part that you left open on both sides has a minimum share of tzitzits in that area alone. So when you look at it, you have a beged at the bottom that's 3/4 of an amma by 3/4 of an amma that has dalet kanfos. But still, the beged as a whole, it's closed the majority of the way. Says the Mishnah Berurah, it's still potter. It's still potter and tzitzis. Continues the Mishnah Berurah. Let's say you had this garment that was closed the majority on the side, so it's potter and tzitzis. But you put tzitzis on it anyway. Then somebody pointed out to you, that talis cotton is not kosher, because that talis cotton is potter and tzitzis. It's closed most of the way on the sides. So you say, no problem, you get a seam ripper or a scissor, and you open it up more on the side. So you put in tzitzits, and then you went ahead and you opened it up majority of the way. Says the Mishnah Berurah, those would still be possible because of what we learned yesterday and in the beginning of the shir. That would have the psul of tasev aloim in asui. When you put the tzitzits on the beged was potter and tzitzits because it was closed. Then you went ahead and you opened it, so you created a beged that was chayiv and tzitzits after the tzitzits were already on. Tasev aloim and asui. You would have to untie and remove the tzitzits and then put them back on for them to be kosher. If the majority on the sides is opened, then it's chayiv and tzitzis. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Hainu dafka roiv mikol habeged. When we measure the roiv that we're talking about over here, so I have my talis cotton, right? Here's the talis cotton. I have the talis cotton. Here's the side. When we say roiv, what do we mean? Do we just measure from the top to the bottom and do a roiv? Says the Mishnah Berurah, yes. Hainu dafka roiv mikol habeged. We need the majority of the entire length of the beged from top to bottom. The majority of it has to be sewed closed in order for it to no longer be considered a four-cornered garment and to be potter and tzitzits. V'loi k'moshe oisen hachayotin. Not the way the tailors in the time of the Chavetz Chaim, he had this problem. Not what the tailors do. They make talis cotton, where they stitch it on the sides, they leave an armhole. So again, let's imagine when I was wearing it here, right? What the tailors did, he said, was they left an armhole. So they started from here under the arm. Trying to figure out how you can see this. Okay. They started here under the arm, and then they stitched it down. But when they measured roiv, what they did was they measured from here, from where they started stitching it under the arm, they measured from there to the bottom, and they left the majority of it opened so that it should be chayiv and tzitzits. But there's something they didn't realize, and that is that they thought that the armhole counts as being opened. V'loikim oisha oisan achayotin talis cotton, shetoifern oisam in atstad and amanicha by nekev shemaknisa by yadayim, v'toifern lamata by anekev. They would go ahead, they would leave an armhole, and then stitch down after the armhole, umanichin roiv pasuach, and over there, from under the armhole and down, they would leave the majority of it opened, and therefore they figured it's chayiv and tzitzis. Umoidedin rak mitachas hayodayim. So when they measured the roiv, they only measured from under the armhole until the bottom of the beged. That's how they measured the roiv. V'zeh toz gomor. And the Mishnah Berurah says that's a complete error. Ki oz loy nikra bas arba kanfais. That's not considered a beged with four corners. The karay v'adavar she'hamavarek mavarek levatala. And it could be that if you make a bracha on a talis cotton like that, it's a bracha levatala. And we'll see why in a moment. It's definitely no better than the 50-50 beged that we discussed earlier, the chayiv b'tzitzis, where we said you're chayiv b'tzitzis, v'asol levarech alav, but you can't make a bracha on it, v'asol laseis by b'Shabbos, you're not allowed to wear it on Shabbos. Ella rather, tzarich limdoid af ma shelamala min hayadayim. First of all, if there's part of the garment that's closed on the side above the arm, let's say part of this is closed, you have to take that into the cheshbon. That's considered closed. And not only that, v'hanekev chashuv gam kein ki'ilus husasam. The armhole, the armhole is also considered to be closed. So, when you have the talis cotton, here, it's a normal talis cotton, it's totally open. If you want to take one side, and you want to leave an armhole, and then you want to stitch it down, going over here, you can't do what the Chavetz Chaim said the tailors used to do. What they used to do was, they figured, okay, the armhole is open. So that counts to our roiv pasuach. The armhole is open. Then I'll measure from after the armhole and down, and I'll leave the majority of that pasuach. So I definitely have roiv pasuach, and it's chayiv and tzitzis. Says the Chavetz Chaim, no. The armhole is considered closed. So this is all considered closed. And now you go from here to the bottom, even if you leave the majority of that towards the bottom open, you still might have roiv sasum. And if you have roiv sasum, it's not chayiv and tzitzis. Now, why is the armhole considered closed? Why is that considered closed? It's open. Why is it considered closed? So there's many different reasons. The simplest thing to understand is the Mefarshim that say that the bottom line is you need a roiv that's opened in a row to the bottom of the beged. You can't have, let's say, open, closed, and then opened at the bottom of the beged, and I'll take all the open areas over here and combine it, be mitzaref it, with the open at the bottom. In order for it to be considered a four-cornered beged, you need roiv of the beged in a row at the bottom has to be opened. So if you close it under the armhole, we're not going to consider the open armhole as part of the part that's open at the bottom. You closed it after the armhole. So the armhole is done. And as far as we're concerned, the armhole is closed. We need roiv pasuach over here going from the point at where it's going to be open and stay opened. From there to the bottom has to be roiv of the entire side of the beged in order to be chayiv in tzitzis. If it's 50-50, we go l'chumra, it's chayiv in tzitzis. But you can't make a bracha. And b'Shabbos, you're not allowed to go out with it on Shabbos. Why? Tishema potter, because it could be that this beged is actually potter in tzitzis. Tzitzis have a kimasui, and then the tzitzis that are attached to the beged are a masui. You're not allowed to carry it on Shabbos. U'kilakaman b'simin yud gimel. It would be also to wear this even out to a rishus rabbanon, to a karmelis. Because this is, since going out to a karmelis, you're putting yourself in the position of a suffix rabbanon. You have a suffix whether or not your tzitzits are a masui, and you're carrying out to a rishus rabbanon. You're not allowed to do that lechatchila. Okay, now continuing very much on the same theme, we go to Sif Ches here on the top of Yud Ches Amud Beis. Kappa. A kappa is exactly what it sounds like. It's a cape. A kappa. shehi pasucha, where it's opened on the sides, be'inyan sheyesh la arba kanfos, so that it is indeed a four-cornered garment. But now what you want to do is, you want to affix straps that attach the front to the back. So you're not stitching it closed, but you're connecting straps that go from the front to the back. And they're permanent straps. They're not straps with buckles. You're sewing on straps connecting the front of the garment to the back of the garment. So what are you doing, essentially? You're closing up the sides of the garment. So what's the halacha that we just learned? We learned if you close up the side of the garment, you need roiv pasuach. You need most of the sides to be opened. So over here, kappa shi psucha be'inyan sheyesh la arba kanfos, it depends. Im yikbu ba estringa la soisa kistuma kedei lepaitra mitzitzis. If you have this cape and you affix to it these estringa, which sounds like strings, but the Mefarshim seem to say they're straps. La soisa kistuma, you put on straps connecting the front and the back to make it as if it's closed, kedei lepaitra mitzitzis, so that it should no longer be a four-cornered garment chayv tzitzis. Einon moyel tikun zeh, this repair is not efficacious. Im loy tihiyeh kavua mechatzi arka ulamata l'chol hapachos. You need to close roiv. What does that mean? You need to close roiv. So coming from the bottom, you have to close up, going down past the halfway mark. That's what the words mean. Im loy tihiyeh kavua mechatzi arka ulamata l'chol hapachos. It has to be kavua. The straps have to be fixed in place from the top, going down to the bottom past the halfway mark, so that it's more than roiv sasam. If it's roiv sasam, so then it's pater and tzitzis. V'gam shetia kavua lamata be'achagor. Not only that, but the closing straps have to continue down past the waistline, past your belt, even if roiv ends before your belt. You have to go down past the belt. Why? Because the roiv that's closed can't be a simple roiv. It has to be a roiv anira la'inayim. It has to be a roiv that when somebody sees you, he realizes that the side of your cape, the front and the back of your cape, are connected together so that the sides are closed more than roiv. Because if it's not roiv anira la'inayim, yeyaser mishum maris ayin, it would be forbidden because of maris ayin. Mishnah Berurah is called chavches astringa hu davar hamachaber tzadi habeged achas alachas. This is some kind of a strap or a string or lacing that connects the front of the beged and the back of the beged. Is called chavtes laseisa kistuma. It makes it as if it's closed. V'lachein en laseis patalas cotton krosim leimata bechetzioi dehevi kisasim. Says the Mishnah Berurah something very important. When you have a talis cotton that you put tzitzits on, that you're going to use to be behind the mitzvah of tzitzits, don't go ahead and put on krosim, put on hooks and eyes, so that you could go and you could hook the front of your talis cotton to the back of your talis cotton. Says the Mishnah Berurah, don't do that. Lamata mechetzioi. Don't do it so that you close up with hooks from the top down past the halfway point. Because if you do, you're closing it more than roiv. And now it's going to be pater and tzitzis. And if you make a bracha, it's a bracha levatala. So don't use hook and eyes to go ahead and close it up more than halfway. Now, it's brought down. Does the Mishnah Berurah say it himself? He does, yeah. V'hu shenichpapin ma'oid rasha akrosim. This is only a problem if the hooks are tight. Nichpafin ma'oid rasha akrosim. If the openings of the hooks are very tight, Latzad sheni, so that the eye goes in very tight. Sheina yochal ha'tiron, so that you can't open it. El al yidei maisa, without doing a significant act. It's only a problem if it's really tight. If it's really tight, then it's considered closed. If it's like a button, or it's very loose, it's something that you can pop open very easily, then it's not considered closed. If it's tight, it's considered a chibur gomer, and then it's considered closed. It would be closed in the context of the halachas of shatnez, if you were combining tzemer and pishtim together in that way, and it's also considered closed in the context of tzitzis, if it's tight. But if the hooks are not tight, loy chashiv chibur al yedei zeh. Ois cotton lamid. He says that the closing of the sides, if you want the beggar to be potter in tzitzis, have to be roiv, but it also has to continue past the belt line, because it has to be a roiv anir la'inayim, otherwise there's a marasayin problem. Eis cotton lamed marasayin, v'hahoylech betalas cotton tamid tachas begodav, if you always wear the talas cotton under your shirt, even if you go in the street, hu betzneya, it's always private, you can never see the talas cotton, then yesh leimer the loishayich b'zeh marasayin, then maybe you don't really have a maris ayin problem. Siftes, says the Mechaber, haknafayim, the corners of the tzitzis tzarech shiyu merubois, they have to be squared off. It has to be a real corner. V'lo shiyu agulais, they cannot be rounded. Says the Mishnah Berurah katlam and al shiyu merubois, they ain't nikol nikri kanaf, because if it's rounded, it's not called a corner. Sif yud, mitznefes petura, a hat or a turban is potter in tzitzits, afilu shal artzas hamayriv, even the types that they wear in the lands of the West. Sheshnei rashem mushlachim al kispeim v'gufam. You have those turbans that they wrap around their head, and it really is just a long bolt of cloth, so it is four-cornered. Imagine a long scarf, and they wrap it around their heads, and then the ends trail down over the body. Now, the reason a mitznefes is potter in tzitzits is because what's chayiv in tzitzis? A beged asher techaseba, a beged that you cover your guf with. A mitznefes, a hat, is a head covering. It's not a covering for the body. Therefore, it's potter in tzitzits. So the chiddush that the Mishnah Berurah is saying over here is, the Mechaber is saying is, afilu shal artzas hamayriv, even the turbans of the western lands, sheshnei rashem mushlachim al kispeim v'gufam, where the ends go over the shoulder and down on the body, afa pisha miskasa baroisha v'rubai, even if it's so big and so long that you're covering your head and roiv of your body, potter, it's still potter, kevin she'ikra lachasis haroish, since it's really intended to be a head covering. The ksuscha amarachmana, because the pasuk says al arba kanfos kisusecha, your ksus, your garment, v'loi ksus roish, and that excludes a head covering. Says the Mishnah Berurah cotton lamed beis kevin she'ikra, since the main point of this turban is as a head covering. It was made to be a hat, to be a head covering, not to be a garment for the body. A head covering is achav and tzitzits. The meaning that a lot of people have to make, let's say, a silver HaTorah for the top of the talis. You might think that turns the talis into a head covering. Why are you putting silver on the top of the talis? Because now you have a beautiful hood. Well, in that case, maybe the talis is not chayiv tzitzis because it's a ksus roish. It's not a garment. Says the Mishnah Berurah, no. Umasha oisen HaTorah l'talis, this HaTorah that we make on the talis, lo mipnei she'ikra nasa l'kisi haroish. It's not because it's made as a head covering. Ela mishum heker she'tzitzis al yoinim lo yischalfu lamata. The ikar reason for an HaTorah is so that we know which tzitzits are the, so to speak, top tzitzits, and which tzitzits are the bottom ones. Because we learned earlier that there's an inyan that the tzitzits that are in the front of the body should always be in the front of the body, because malin b'kodesh v'loy meridin, like we had in the Mishkan, that the krushim, the beams that made the walls that were on the tzafain, should always be put on the tzafain, because the tzafain had an added kedusha. So again, the HaTorah is not there because the talis is a head covering. The HaTorah is there to know where the top is, and for zeh keli vanveyu. The Ari wasn't makbid on keeping the front ones always in the front. And indeed, we find that the Eliyarab is makel. And he doesn't worry. He says if the front got ripped a little and you want to turn it to the back, you can. It's not a problem of being of malam b'kodesh v'loy merid. Okay, we'll stop over here. We'll continue next time with Sif Yud Aleph. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. The discuss of limud HaTorah should be Megan against Klal Yisrael. The Baruch Shem should send Yeshua, Sefuas, Parnasa, and Shidduchim to all those in need, and we should be zeicher to see the B'yizkal Tzedek b'mheri v'yameinu. Amen. Be well.